This week's installment of Minnesota Officiating Voices brings you Kevin Merkle, Hall of Famer, longtime director of the Minnesota State High School League officiating program, basketball official, husband, dad, and grandpa. Enjoy.
My name is Kevin Merkle. Grew up in St. Paul, and after spending time going to college in Iowa, I came back to Minnesota as a teacher and coach, spending most of my career in Northfield, Minnesota, before changing careers and actually working at the State High School League my last 16 years, 15 of those which I was the director of our officials program. I officiated primarily basketball. I think the reason for that is that was my shortest career. I was lucky enough to play both baseball and football in college, but couldn't play basketball, primarily because of my skill level. So what I did to stay involved was to begin officiating. And I found it to be a great way to stay around that game. And I continued to officiate basketball for well over 30 years, all the way up until part of the time I worked at the high school league. I also picked up along the way, having some experience playing baseball. I also officiated, or umpired, I should say, both baseball and softball. Sporadically, not near as much as I did basketball, but enjoyed working those sports as well. There really was no individual that helped me get started. I started officiating because I wanted to. And I think the reason were twofold. One was to stay involved and find a way to stay involved in game basketball. And the other one, quite frankly, during college, it was a great part-time job. I was looking for a way to make income. And it was a way to do it that worked out well with the other schedule I had for classes and so on. I was able to work junior high games, men's league games. I even worked college women's games at our college when college women's basketball was just beginning. And then went on and actually worked a couple of high school games before I even graduated from college. So while no one really got me started, I did get encouragement along the way. There are several people I worked with who had experience. I was also taking a short officiating course while I was in college, where we got a little bit of training. There were some veteran officials there that gave us great advice as well as encouragement on hanging in there. You know, one of the biggest things in officiating is it takes a while to learn. It's a skill like any other. And you don't just jump out and start at a high level. You have to start someplace and then work at gaining those skills and getting better with what you do. As far as a magic moment when I felt I could do this, I probably got in over my head, but while in high school, I ended up having a friend who got myself and a partner who was also a college student, a high school varsity game at a very small school. We actually did a boys and girls doubleheader, and we're trained. We had passed the test and all that kind of thing. But this was in the state of Iowa where they play 6-on-6 girls basketball. And we actually worked a girls basketball game, having a first game at the varsity level, having never worked one. We actually traveled 35 miles the night before to watch a game so we could see how it was done, because it is different from regular basketball. And so we kind of cut our teeth the hard way. And we did that game and then a varsity boys game following that. And as I said, we might have been in over our heads. I wouldn't recommend that's the way to do it to get started, even though it was a very small school. It was also a very small and noisy gym with quite a bit of pressure for a couple of rookies. But you know, we worked our way through it. We hung in there and got through that game. And I guess that's when I found out that, yeah, I can do it. And I'm not sure at that point I had any aspirations, excuse me, to really go on to a very high level. That wasn't really the point at that time. We're just trying to get started, and we're thrilled to be able to work a varsity game at the high school level, and worked a couple others after that, which again turned out to be, for where we were at, relatively good experiences. There are a lot of challenges with officiating. I think the one thing that I ran into most of my career was the time factor. I wanted to officiate, and yet with the jobs I had, I was a teacher and a coach, and then became an athletic director. And my time was limited. And so I didn't work as many games as many people did. I had to balance that along with family and other obligations. And I know people who sometimes haven't done that balance correctly, and it can cause problems for them in their personal life. The other challenge is it's not just the time of going to the games and working those games. It's, of course, the travel, but also it's a challenge of preparing. It's going to meetings, taking tests, doing the proper preparation so that you can work. I always wanted to feel prepared. And so it was rare, unless I was working games on a very regular level, I always took time to prepare before a game, reviewing rules, looking back over some test questions, trying to anticipate things that may come up that night. And that was personal preparation, in addition to the preparation you always do with your partners prior to the game. So that's where some of the time consuming aspects of it comes in. And that was the biggest challenge for me, I think, was trying to balance that time with everything else. And then, of course, the other piece of challenges is the challenge of the games themselves. Trying to stay on top of that. You make mistakes. You're bound to make mistakes. In fact, one of the sayings I had is the night I don't make a mistake and have a perfect game is the night I'll hang up the whistle. Well, I hung it up before that ever happened. It's just impossible, especially in the game of basketball. You strive for perfection. But as we have said when I was leading at the high school league as well, strive for perfection and accept excellence. And some nights go better than others. And that's a challenge that you have to be able to leave that behind you, learn from the mistakes that you make, try to make sure that that doesn't happen as you move on to the next event, the next game. And I learned and tried to keep things in perspective. Consider what the real role of an official is, and that is to make that game go well for the participants, the coaches, the fans. And you're really there to manage the game and facilitate it. It's not about you, it's about the kids. And to the kids playing that game, whether it's a 7th grade boys or girls basketball game, or it's an adult league game, or it's a high school game, or even a college level game, each one of those is the biggest game for the people that are playing in that game and for those involved. And I always tried to keep that in mind and know that I was there to manage and facilitate so that that game went well and they had a fair opportunity to play and enjoy themselves. And then also to keep in mind that it should be fun for officials as well. So try to go out there, try to have a smile on your face. That wasn't always easy sometimes, but try to prepare and have that kind of mentality going into the game is really helpful. When I reflect on my officiating career, there's no doubt the first thing that comes back to me is the relationships I was able to build. When I first started officiating at the high school level and started working on a more regular basis, I worked with just a couple of different people. You worked with the same partners quite often, and you really build a relationship with them. And some of the things you remember are the times that you had in the car traveling back and forth to games, the things that happened. And even when we get together to this day, right away, some of the things that we talk about are things that happened. And remember this, remember that game. And of course, some of those fond memories come back to you. Some are good, some not so good. And then I was also able to build a bunch of relationships with officials working at the college level. And you work with a lot of different people. And what was really nice about that is that later in my career, I actually retired probably a little bit before, or maybe I would have had to. But between my work with the league and some physical issues with my legs and so on, I thought it was best to stop before someone told me I had to. But what was neat is I was working at the high school league then as the director of the officials program. And because of that, I was able to maintain a lot of the relationships that I had and built over those years. And it was always fun, whether it's at state tournaments or other regular season games or meetings we had during the preseason, whatever it might be. It was just great to reconnect with those people. The officiating community is a bunch of really great people. And you build a tight relationship, and especially when you go out and do difficult games, there's a bond there that happens. I hate to use this as an analogy, but it's almost like going to war together, going to battle together. You have to have each other's backs, and you're there to help each other and protect each other. And you really build a bond and camaraderie that really lasts, and it's really important. Along with that, I think just being a part of a game, the thrill of the game, especially if it's maybe a little bit bigger game where the bands are playing and the teams come out on the floor and you're standing there for the national anthem, you get what I call the butterfly effect. It's just like as a player, you get that pregame jitters, that pregame nervousness, which is stressful to a point, but it also is satisfying because it feels good and it gets you ready to go out and perform. And then when you do go out and perform, you get involved in the game, you get in the flow, and you feel good. It's just like that of being an athlete. In a way, you're a performer. And of course, then the satisfaction of having worked a good game after the game, knowing that you did your best, even if you made mistakes. But you know the game went well, you managed it. It was a fair game. The kids had a good experience. There's that satisfaction that you leave with that keeps you going. That's what you remember, and that's what I enjoyed about it the most. As far as what keeps you coming back from officiating, I think it was just some of those things I just said. It was the challenge um, of working the best, of knowing the next game was always a challenge. As I got further along my career, I also realized that it was an opportunity to give back. I won't say that that's why I started officiating. It was probably more about me, having a job, having that opportunity to be involved. But as I grew in my career and grew in my experience and matured, I guess you could say, you learn that what you're doing is providing opportunities for others. You're able to give back. There were lots of people that went on officiated games so I could play. It was an opportunity I could do to do the same. When you look at the travel and you look at the money you spend on uniforms and the time you spend, and you figure out how much per hour you're really making, and sometimes it's kind of hard to justify that. But when you know that you're doing good at the same time, I think that's real helpful. And I think that kept me going. In fact, to the point where after I retired, or mostly retired at the high school league several years ago, I actually got back into officiating. I didn't feel I could do basketball as much as I would have liked to. I just don't think my body could take that running up and down the court. So I went back and officiated softball, just at the lower level primarily, ninth grade, 10th grade JV games. And I've done that the last couple of springs and really enjoyed it. And the reason I did it was strictly as a way to give back. I know there's a need. I didn't want to take any varsity games. I don't want to take games away from younger officials who are aspiring to work their way up the ladder. But I wanted to be there to help out and assist where needed. And I really enjoyed that and was able to enjoy the relationships with the kids and working with them and the coaches. I guess that's something else I mentioned before. That's always part of the relationships that you build as well, not only with fellow officials, but with those with whom you or for whom you work as well. As far as advice and encouragement, I could go on and on. I think one of the main things, especially for young and newer officials, to understand that you don't have to aspire to go to an upper level. You don't have to put in a ton of time to become a high school or college official. We need officials at all levels. We need officials at youth games, middle school, lower level games, ninth grade, 10th grade, JV, and so on. There's a need in almost every sport, in every part of the state, for people to win and work at those levels. And actually, that's not a bad way to go. First of all, it's a great way to learn the skills that you need to learn. That's really where you have to start. And it's also, your pay per hour might even be better than what it is at some of the upper levels, because primarily, one of the big differences, you usually don't have to travel much. You can work close to your own community, contact the athletic directors or the park and rec directors or others in your communities, sharing that you're interested in officiating and how much you get started and they need help. And you'll find that you can get those games. And a lot of times those games are late afternoon. That can provide a challenge for jobs. But it's also great because you're done and you're home for dinner. That's one thing I like with the softball games I work. I work a game 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And by 6 o'clock, I'm usually home. I don't have to take evenings away from my family and so on. So I'd really encourage people to think about that. Then if you catch the bug, so to speak, which a lot of people do, and you enjoy it, and you want to work your way up the ladder, and you have the time and can give the effort to do so, then go for it. And then you can work your way up to become a high school official. And of course, there's a lot of satisfaction working at that level and moving on up. The other piece of advice I would say is that, and I mentioned this earlier, just like anything else, you have to start someplace. Don't expect to go out and be an accomplished official the first couple of times. Also, don't expect that because you're a good player or you know how to play the game that you're going to necessarily be a good official. It's a different aspect of how you do things. And you have to understand the rules a lot better than what you do as a player. You think you know the rules as a player, but you really have to dive deeper and know the rules much better as an official. So give yourself some space, give yourself an opportunity to grow and to learn and to know that it isn't just going to happen overnight. But with repetition, like anything else, you'll get better at it. And as you get better at it, you feel better about doing it. You're going to like it even more. The other thing that's going to happen, I mentioned this as well, is you're going to make mistakes. It's impossible to be perfect. Humans make mistakes. You're going to have a lot of bang bang calls in whatever sport you work, difficult calls. You see it from one angle that you have, and you've got a quick snapshot, and you have to base your decision on that. You have to be decisive. You make your decisions. You do it with confidence, and then you live with that decision. And once it's over, and you move on. And you have to learn to blow it off. And when you know you made a mistake, which sometimes you will, or somebody gets on your case, and you think, geez, maybe I did miss that one. You still have to learn to let that go. If you think about that too much, it's going to affect the next call, and the next call. And that's when you get yourself in trouble. So learn a mistake ritual, similar to what an athlete has to work on. That once you make that mistake, you do something different. And maybe you tug at your ear, or maybe you brush your hand, or maybe you wipe your brow, or something like that. Say, hey, that's gone, that's over with, on to the next play. And that's the other piece of advice, is to learn concentration. And it took me a while before I understood that you really have to concentrate. And that's a skill that it's hard to do for an entire game. And you really have to break it down and concentrate on one play at a time. In basketball, it's one possession at a time. In baseball or softball, it's really one pitch at a time, or one play at a time. And each sport has its own way of doing that. But you really have to break it down into segments. And then I would always do it like in a basketball game, when you got at the end of a quarter and a half, when you had a break or a timeout, it was time to refocus again and say, okay, we got through that. That went well. Now we need to refocus on the next one. And where you really have to focus is when you get in those games that maybe aren't so good. You get in a game that's one-sided. It gets to be a lopsided score. Maybe the play isn't very good. It's really easy to lose concentration. That's when you can get yourself in trouble. So learning how to concentrate from beginning to end, and to be able to then referee or officiate with consistency, is critical. So I think that's about all I want to say. Maybe the last thing is, and this kind of goes with what I said as far as learning and growing as an official, is to be coachable. You have to be willing to take criticism, just as an athlete does, and to learn from those that have done it before. I officiated basketball at various levels for over 35 years. And even at the end of that time, I was still learning things, little situations and little ways in which you could adapt and look at things and get in a little better position or better understanding the rules. That learning and growing never changes or never goes away. And as somebody said, as athletes are concerned, or even in the individual life, you're either getting better or you're getting worse. And so what you always want to do is strive for getting better. Make goals, practice things, have a goal or one thing that you want to work on in this game, and maybe something else you work on in the next game. You have to continue to study rules, continue to put in that effort to prepare yourself. And the thing is that when you do that, the great thing is the feedback that you get, the satisfaction that you enjoy in knowing that you did a good job. It's a great thing. It's a great thing to stay involved. It's a great way to get in shape and to get some physical activity. It's a great way to enjoy sports at another level. At the same time, you're giving back and providing an opportunity for kids and others to have those great experiences and to learn life lessons. So I always call it a win-win-win. It's a triple win, and I strongly encourage you to give it a shot. Get the help and assistance you need, and good luck.
This week's installment of Minnesota Officiating Voices brings you Kevin Merkle, Hall of Famer, longtime director of the Minnesota State High School League officiating program, basketball official, activities director, husband, dad, and grandpa. Enjoy.